The success of advanced capitalist societies is measured in part by economic growth, and the success of individuals within these societies is often judged by their job and what they can purchase with the fruits of their work. But there are some internal tensions within capitalism, some dystopian elements to it. Marx and Rousseau are two of the most prominent thinkers to question so-called progress in civilization. Both have influenced the philosopher Kate Soper. With the world facing environmental catastrophe, she proposes an alternative vision of human flourishing. She calls it alternative hedonism.
Kate Soper, welcome to Philosophy Bites.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here.
We're going to look at the topic of alternative hedonism, which is a phrase that you've coined. Could you just say something about what it means for you?
Yes, alternative hedonism is the general term I've used for the idea that we should be pursuing and enjoying alternative ways of living and of enjoying ourselves to that of the consumerist lifestyle. I've wanted to point up the way in which, in virtue of the ecological crisis, it's very important that we rethink our ways of living. But on the whole, one of the problems, I think, has been that there have only been technical fixed type of responses to the problems of environmental degradation and global warming and so on. My argument is premised on the idea that even if the consumerist lifestyle were indefinitely sustainable, it would not necessarily prove more enjoyable. Additionally, I would argue that people are more likely to shift to more sustainable ways of living if they are persuaded of the pleasures of doing so, rather than freaked out by the gloom and doom associated with global warming warnings.
Perhaps we should get absolutely clear what a consumerist lifestyle is before we move on to the question of what alternatives there are to that lifestyle.
A consumerist lifestyle is obviously associated with a capitalist economy. I suppose its main characteristics are that it's been developed in relation to the pursuit of profit. By and large, consumerism is associated with the growth model of the economy, which is built around the constant multiplication of modes of gratifying existing needs and the production of new needs, the sort of fostering of new sources of gratification, wherever these can be developed in a way that allows them to be sold for a profit on the market.
So I'm a victim of this because every couple of years I think I really, really need a new computer because the old one doesn't do quite as many things as a newer model does. What alternatives are there for me? I'm hooked into that.
I think we're all hooked into a commodified lifestyle in various kinds of ways. We're willy-nilly, as it were, caught up in it in virtue of insurance schemes, pensions. It's not just in terms of the acquisition of new gadgetry and material goodies of various kinds. We're all caught up in it, and I think we're all liable to its seductions. But I think that there are all sorts of pleasures that are actually going missing. People are beginning to wake up to the downsides of modern consumerism, negative byproducts such as stress and overwork and ill health and obesity and the commercialisation of childhood, as well as the pollution and environmental degradation. So although people are very worried about the impact, as it were, on the environment of very affluent lifestyles, they're also now beginning to realise that they're not necessarily in their own interests. For more selfish, if you like, rather than altruistic reasons, people are beginning to want to move to a less stressed and less work-dominated kind of way of living.
So you're saying that there are intrinsic benefits in alternative ways of living that might actually trump any kind of pleasures we could possibly get from consumerism, and besides, we need to move in that direction anyway because we're facing ecological catastrophe.
Yes, there are certainly reasons why we all need to be thinking in terms of moving to a less resource-intensive, post-oil, post-consumerist way of living. But I'm also saying that the affluent lifestyle we've got has got lots of dystopian aspects to it. Consumerism is rather narrowly constraining in all sorts of ways. It doesn't allow us to think in terms of more sensual and less encumbered ways of living, for example. In lots of ways, I think contemporary lifestyles are quite puritanical.
What about the workaholic who seems very happy, caught up in consumerism? and probably wouldn't know what to do with his leisure time or her leisure time if presented with it.
Well, workaholic is actually a recent concept. I believe those people have succumbed to the pressures that the work and spend economy has developed. Were we to move to an alternative framework of provision and a different way of organising the work-leisure divide, that probably wouldn't be so critically important to so many people. I mean, there will always be people who are obsessed about work, if you like, but why should we not have enough free time to become much more obsessed about our hobbies, for example?
Structurally, that sounds not dissimilar to some of the things Rousseau said in the 18th century about the benefits of a much simpler life as opposed to the complex and ultimately unrewarding life that his contemporaries were leading in cities.
Yeah, there are some parallels, but there are also, I think, ways in which this isn't really a particularly Rousseauian vision, because I'm not really arguing for a return to simplicity or for a more natural way of living. This isn't about going back to nature or even necessarily going back to something more rustic or rural. It's actually about going forward to something that is possibly much more baroque in its forms of provision, sort of enriched, enhanced way of being human, if you like. I mean, it seems to me that a post-consumerist way of living could actually open up all sorts of avenues for gratification, for pleasure, for sensual experience, even for risk-taking of an ecologically sustainable kind that we have not yet even begun to think about. So I don't want to project it as if it was something that was moving back to some simpler, more ascetic way of being.
So if it's not a bucolic vision, what sort of pleasures are we talking about? You've mentioned sensual pleasures. The only thing that springs to mind for me there is sex, eating, enjoying the countryside. I'm trying to understand what sorts of pleasures they are that are so attractive that we can only achieve outside the consumerist lifestyle.
Well, I think sex would be important, actually. I think much more time for convivial pleasures of all kinds would be part of it. I'm not saying that there aren't pleasures and a great deal of fun to be had from a consumerist lifestyle, but I also think it comes at the cost of other kinds of pleasures, and these would include more time for being with each other, for being idle, providing it goes together with alternative forms of provision for slower kinds of modes of transport, so that we've got a way of proceeding which is much more reliant on the use of the bicycle, of walking, of boating, of non-combustion engine modes of transport. Then our city life, as well as our rural life, is going to be transformed, which means that we've got different kinds of space. We can be free of a lot of the noise and stench and pollution that we suffer from at the moment. Children, I think, would be released from the nervy supervision of adults the whole time. They would be saved from the forms of commercialisation, which are, well, now sort of totalitarian in some forms. The way that children get co-opted into a life for consuming, I think, would not be allowed in any other context but at the market, and they would benefit greatly. I don't want to deny that there are lots of things that people enjoy from consumer culture, and some of them we'd have to give up. One of them would be very fast and flexible modes of transport, I think, such as air flight and extensive use of the motor car. But if the provision is there, then I think going around by bike and enjoying nature more and so on, that would be part of it, yeah.
In order to prevent free riders on the back of this, people who just benefit from what the majority are doing by being less consumer-oriented in what they do, it's going to involve quite a lot of heavy policing, because some people will want to drive their fast car down these empty roads that you've created.
Yes, there would be what you're calling free riders, I suppose. But what I've wanted to try to argue through the concept of alternative hedonism is that it is in a way based on an emergent structure of feeling through which people would themselves want to be self-pleased, and that we would have a majority mandating the necessary changes. In which case, I think there would be, a mandate for various forms of policing of the free rider types, through taxation maybe, through very severe limits on road speeds and things of this kind.
Within consumerism, it's clear that lots of things that are commodified are things which you might otherwise feel should be free, like how we use our leisure time in terms of physical activity, for instance. So gyms become very expensive, exclusive places to go, and people end up running on running machines when they could run to the gym and get just as much exercise.
Well, I mean, people have ended up in gyms because it isn't terribly pleasant to run to the gym. And indeed, if you know Los Angeles, for example, the streets are sinisterly quiet after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And, you know, these multi-storey gyms are packed with people. People go to these gyms to do treadmill running because the streets are so unpleasant now. That they are as a consequence of the car culture. Capitalism or the market economy is providing for the goods that we still do, I think, want to have forms of exercise, forms of relating to each other, leisure time of various kinds. It's selling us back these goods that we have sacrificed through overwork. So we've got a kind of compensatory dynamic going on here, whereby having denied us the adequate free time to gratify these needs in a non-commodified way, capitalism then sells us them back at one remove, if you like. Some of the examples here are the emergence of a whole raft of different kinds of agencies that will undertake forms of personal relating, dating agencies, wife-selecting agencies, all sorts of 24/7 childcare agents. There's also an increasing emphasis on luxury holidays through which you will regain your quality time. Or there's services that will provide you with home baking or home cooking of various kinds that you no longer have the time to do in the home yourself. All these things are, in a way, a sort of secondary commodification of primary needs that we would, at an earlier stage of the market economy, have satisfied ourselves. That we still buy them is, I would say, indicative of the fact that there is some sort of natural impulse, as it were, to gratify these kinds of needs, to provide ourselves with these sorts of services.
I suppose we ought to be agreeing with you, because making Philosophy Bites, we're giving it away, we're investing our time and a small amount of money in doing this. So are we moving towards a kind of alternative hedonism, perhaps?
I think Philosophy Bites is an avant-garde example of what one might do in one's free time without necessarily thinking, I have to make money out of this. Indeed, my sense is that you might be getting more pleasure out of precisely not commodifying it and offering it as part of this more avant-garde gift economy.
Which are the thinkers who have influenced you in coming to your conclusions?
A very important influence in my thinking about needs and consumption generally has been Marx, actually. I did my PhD study on the theory of needs in Marx, or rather the absence of a theory of needs in Marx, really. Essential versus relativist ideas of consumption and so on. But yes, I've also been influenced, as you implied, I might have been by Rousseau, though I think more in terms of this division he makes between amour de soi, the needs of self-preservation, and the amour propre or emulative, other regarding interest in the esteem of the other, because one of the things that's worried me about my own argument around alternative hedonism is how you do actually provide for alternative ways of gratifying amour propre to those provided by the market. I mean, it seems to me that one of the reasons why consumerism has actually come easiest in some ways, or succeeded, has to do with the fact that it provides a very easy way of excelling your neighbour through the acquisition of material goods and so on. You can actually signal your, if you like, your superiority, as it were, and you can command respect. Well, that's the idea. You're keeping up with the Joneses sort of stuff. To get back to Rousseau here, I mean, I do think that Rousseau is absolutely right about our particular human need for the satisfaction of amour propre. Therefore, one of the challenges of an alternative hedonist, post-consumerist culture would be, how do you provide for vanity and pride and all that side of things.
Kate Soper, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
And you can hear more Philosophy Bites at www.philosophybites.com.